for pre-live loop. Going live. All right. Welcome in, everybody. We are here doing episode 12 with Dr. Miller and I. And today we're going to be talking about why Afterlife Apologetics is so important. We've got a couple different things that we're going to cover specifically. We're going to talk about the appeal and the usefulness of Afterlife Apologetics. We're going to talk about the personal connection and stories of it. We're going to be talking about the integration with other fields, the balance of emotion and evidence, and real life examples and testimony. So stick in with us. We're going to go through those things. A couple of quick announcements for those who don't know. Both Dr. Miller and I are in the process of writing books. He has several out already. If you have not already, go to Amazon, look up J. Steve Miller and his near-death experiences book, as well as his deathbed experiences book. I think you'll find both of those incredibly informative. And we're gonna get a website up soon, Afterlife Apologetics, where you guys can find all the kind of new happenings and get on the wait list for some of the books that we're going to release, so you can know right away when those things are out and you guys can go through and consume them. In the interim, we're going to continue to produce some awesome content for you guys here in the form of the podcast, and then be on the lookout here soon for me to start rolling out weekly videos that are like 5 to 15 minutes. But these podcasts continue to be long form conversations where both Steve and I can kind of go back and forth on topics that we want to talk about, in addition to giving you guys a long form audio version to have us be able to kind of explain some of these ideas. So this is meant to be an engaging and interactive experience, in the sense that we want you guys to comment on things that you're interested in having us answer, maybe issues that you've ran into in the research, or issues that you have biblically, any of those kind of things, or maybe objections you have from a naturalistic perspective, any of those type of things. Comment those in the comment section below. We will definitely spend time in the future addressing those, so that you guys can feel that you are getting those questions answered. And that's why we're making this resource, because we think this evidence is so powerful, but there are definitely a lot of questions around it. And so it needs to have time and expertise dedicated to it in order to properly answer these questions. Anything to add to that, Steve?
I'd just say we're trying to answer the question of why spend all this time trying to think through afterlife apologetics. I think there are many reasons that kind of set this apart from a lot of other approaches to evidence that make it very appealing and very important. Important enough for us to put 12 episodes, 12 hours of episodes so far. Why should you get into this in depth? Well, I think it's extremely impactful, not only for us and our faith, but for others as we talk to them and as well. So let's just get into some of these reasons. What makes it important to you, or what are some of the things that stand out to you, Charlie, as reasons that kind of set this apart? And there's a forte of afterlife apologetics.
Yeah. So I think for me, I've mentioned this before, but I'd like to, we're going to elaborate on this today, which is that Afterlife Apologetic has the ability to, I believe, hit both the mind and the heart. And in that, I think that if the best answers to questions are ones that appeal to the human on multiple levels, that appeal to our humanity on multiple levels. And so within Afterlife Apologetics, you have the deeply beautiful personal narrative that people give you of the profoundness of heaven, their interactions with God, their encounters with deceased loved ones, and the loving realm, and all these different positive elements that I think they personify these abstract theological concepts that we find in these other intellectual arguments, that even though those other arguments may be philosophically rigorous, I don't think that they appeal to us on an everyday level in common language. I think it's really challenging to take these abstract theological arguments and be like, oh yeah, and that's why you shouldn't feel bad today. And so that to me is where Afterlife Apologetics is extremely appealing, is because when you read through these people's experiences, I feel like with any good story, you're deeply drawn in to the narrative of it, the narrative structure of it. And Jordan Peterson has done a good amount of talking about this, in that human beings are stories are a deep way of us understanding the reality around us. That's the way in which worldviews are really just stories, right? And they're stories that we identify with, that tell us truth about reality and about ourselves. And so I think what we do is we tend to tell these stories, whether consciously or subconsciously, I think that we're telling these stories. And so ultimately, that's where I find near-death experiences and deathbed visions and just afterlife apologetics as a whole to be incredibly effective, is that I feel it is naturally a narrative-based apologetic. And so because of this structure, it has a tendency to sneak its way in to our subconscious levels, to find it convincing and convicting in a way that other arguments may not necessarily be able to accomplish as easily or at all.
And isn't that so Jesus? I
Mm,
mean, Jesus often he was asked a question, he would respond with a parable,
hmm.
where he would say, "Hey, there was this rich man and
Yeah,
this beggar guy, and
exactly.
look what happened to them." And all of a sudden, number one, you can remember the story.
Yeah.
Number
Hmm.
two, it's
Hmm.
impactful. It's not just kind of giving a logical syllogism and saying, "Therefore, believe this." So the
Hmm.
stories are important as a part of evidence.
Well, and what's notable is like in those stories, you're kind of left in Jesus's parables. In a sense, you're kind of left to determine what it means, right? And so, of course, Jesus goes on later to explain to the disciples, like, this is what I meant, guys. Um, but but
In some of them,
in some of them, yeah, in some of them, exactly. But I think like what Jesus is attempting to accomplish is he understands that when I'm able to tell a story and allow people to draw their own conclusions off of the evidence in the story, they're way more likely to internalize the lessons of that story if they come and draw those conclusions themselves versus me drawing the conclusion for them and be like, and this is why you should believe that, versus Jesus kind of allows people to answer the question themselves, which by doing so, I feel it allows them to internalize the lesson with such strength and clarity that I don't think any other means by which you could teach someone would be as effective.
okay. So let's just This is just kind of out of the blue. I had a couple of stories here. Why don't we just start with the stories instead of letting them illustrate other points and see what our audience and you can draw out of these stories? And these are stories of visionary experiences that happen to people that I trust, have one reason or another to trust. And you tell me what you make out of them evidentially. Does that sound fair?
Sounds good.
Because I think this kind of feeds us into why this is so important, because these are life changing experiences. So I was sitting at a table at a men's meeting. A lot of lonely men, older men these days, and it seems like ministries to them just draw in a ton. So there were probably 60 people at this event. There were about five around my table. I was at a new church. I didn't know anybody, so we started introducing ourselves around. I mentioned, "Hey, I'm a professor and I teach a course on death, dying, and afterlife. And I researched near death and deathbed experiences." Well, the guy immediately to my left says, "Oh, those things are real." I said, What do you mean?" He said, "I had one of those." So I said, "Well, I need to talk to you afterwards." And so he told me a little bit then, but basically, this is a guy who, very intelligent person, older, probably in his 50s. He helps banks decide on how they will invest their money. Okay, a money guy. Uh, Very smart, very good at sifting evidence and things. But he experienced a condition where he was struggling with appendicitis, and as sometimes happens, that causes a sepsis condition in his body. And so he's laying there almost dead, right? His wife's a nurse, and she's afraid he's going to die. So I said, "Well, tell me about this experience you had." He said, "Well, I was extremely ill. I was on a ventilator in the hospital in ICU recovering from surgery. I saw Jesus there in the room with me. I saw him as plain as day. He put his hand on my forehead to comfort me, just as my mom used to do whenever I was ill growing up. I actually felt Jesus' hand on my forehead. I can't adequately describe the resulting peace in words. Totally still, peaceful, pure calmness, amazing comfort." He told me later it's been kind of hard in life because he keeps looking back on this experience, wanting to reproduce that incredible feeling that he had. Um, he assured me, speaking of Jesus, he assured me that everything was going to be okay. It wasn't like I'd encountered some spiritual identity and assumed it was Jesus. I absolutely knew it was Jesus. Upon regaining consciousness while still on the ventilator, I motioned to my wife, this is him speaking, who is also a nurse, for a pen and paper, and I wrote, I saw him. Now, he says, I reflected regularly and deeply on the experience in the months and years following, totally convinced that I couldn't dismiss it as a dream or hallucination or mere emotional experience. It was the realest thing I've ever seen or experienced, too authentic an experience to not be real. It was tangible, as real as me talking to you right now. Nothing that anybody could possibly say could make me doubt it. By far, it's the most powerful experience I've ever had. Now, I've never heard him give a testimony of this in front of a group. He's not a speaker type. He says he rarely shares it with people, but it's the most meaningful experience in his life. And also, this man, I don't know what he drives, looks like a truck driving type guy, who's helping banks with investments and a very serious guy. And but when he shares this, he starts choking up. I
Mm,
said, "What about that?" He said, it's so powerful. And when you see a guy like that choking up about something, to me, that is a powerful evidence that he's not. Why would he be lying to me about that?
mhm.
He had no reason to lie. He had no personal motive. He's not publishing a book that he's trying to market. Why would he be lying? Does anything else strike you about that testimony, Charlie? I mean, these are stories. Why are they so powerful to us?
Hmm. You know, there are some
I
objections.
just jumped. I just got Charlie. He's having to think through this one.
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to think of I'm trying to think if I want to go at like maybe some of the evidential arguments of it's interesting that you point out in the story. At first you might want to be like, well, maybe he was hallucinating, but what was an interesting piece of the story that you said was that immediately after he asked for a pen and paper and then was able to kind of write out what he saw um, to his wife, and that again would suggest to me a very conscious mind. It's hard to say obviously without being in the room, and I think anyone's opinion would be clearly subjective, but to have the characteristic to follow, I saw Jesus and this is the interaction I had. It was realer than real. It was the most real thing I've ever had. It was so powerful. And then he also then immediately after took the time to legibly write out for his wife in a way that she could read, I saw him. I think speaks to the vividness of the experience, right? And in some deathbed, or excuse me, near death experiences, they range dramatically in their content in terms of some can be their own series of novels, and then some are very quick like this, but what doesn't ever change is the impact that they have, is even the short and the long ones have such profound impacts on the people who experience them, because it's a moment where I feel you have no doubts about what is true. And I think that the moments of in life where we have such clarity about what is really true and what isn't are moments that impact us the greatest, or have the greatest impact on us. And so what sticks out to me is that even though he has this experience, which I think you could have easily argued he should just write it off as a hallucination. I mean, who knows what kind of drugs are flowing in his system? Who knows what kind of, you could make all these potential explanations of, well, maybe it was this or maybe it was that, but it doesn't comport with the experience he had and the deep profound impact that experience had. Because I've had experiences that did not feel lucid. They felt, translucent. Translucent. So and you don't walk away from those experiences transformed by the realness of it, right? You may walk away transformed from the interpretation of it, but not the realness of it. Those are two very different things. So it's kind of like having a dream where you go to the Grand Canyon versus seeing the Grand Canyon. It's like, I think both can be impactful, but impactful in different ways. The scope and the grand beauty of the Grand Canyon that I see in real life impacts me in such a profound way that if someone came to me and said the Grand Canyon doesn't exist, I would just write them off as a crazy person, because I would say I've been there and I've seen it. Versus if I had a dream, I'd be like, well, maybe. But this is how it impacted me in the dream, and this is how that impacted me in my life. So it's kind of like a domino effect. But anyway, these are just kind of my observations about the experience that you've shared, is that it stands out to me that you said he was an atheist too. Was he an atheist when he had the experience, or?
Oh, I didn't say he was an atheist. I don't
Oh,
I
sorry,
don't
sorry.
remember what I don't remember what he was when he had the experience. But when I met him years later, he was in church.
Mm,
He's following Jesus.
hmm,
It did not turn him away from church, and he thought through this hallucination theory.
mm,
He thought through everything. What could it have been? Most people, I think, when they wake up from a hallucination, they say, "Oh my goodness, did I have a hallucination? I was hallucinating. I
mm,
thought this and that." And it's usually something crazy that was happening.
mm-hmm,
This was real. He was
mm,
sure it was real after all these years of thinking about it. Very intelligent person. He says, no, it was not a hallucination. It was as real as me talking to you right now. Now, that in itself is some evidence that needs to be considered. As I look at him and I say, apparently, had I had the same experience that he had, I'd be saying the same thing.
mm.
That this was real. This was not a hallucination. I saw Jesus on the other side. And I think that is a good bit of evidence. Now, you mentioned the thing about the Grand Canyon. I think that's interesting. Some people will say, well, seeing is believing. I'll only believe in something if I've seen it myself. And so, uh, and that's good. For this person, Paul, he saw he saw it himself. He saw it. But there's a second way of learning things, and that's by finding people you trust for their integrity and their experience and their eyewitnesses, and you believe them. You say, you've seen the Grand Canyon. I have not. I actually believe in the Grand Canyon. If you only believe in the things that you've seen, you're going to have a pretty small map of the world because it's only those places you've been to.
Mhm, mhm,
For the great majority of things, we have to trust reliable people. I think that this person is a reliable people and is a reliable person in many regards, and especially when his testimony is replicated in millions of Americans. 1 out of 25 Americans have had an experience where they've had a near-death experience. Over 80% of the dying. That is one lineup of witnesses. And many of them have been personally interviewed by people who can vouch for their integrity. I can go to friends and family that I already respect long term and find their experiences. Uh, this is some powerful testimonial evidence, and if you look at it as a type of legal evidence, this is what you're looking for in a testimony. And when you see a grown man crying, you're like, I mean, you see this in cases. You'll see somebody testifying about a wife dying, and they're not emotional at all. They're just kind of telling like it, whatever. Well, that counts against them in a court of law because people say, I don't think that he's really disturbed that this person's died.
mm,
But if they're all emotional and not many people are good enough actors to put on a true crying scene just to make it up. And in a near death experience, what's their motive?
yeah,
What's their motive? Why is this guy in his 50s crying in front of me? There's something there. This was a powerful experience, and it grabs the emotions and not you read the cosmological argument and you say, wow, that is really powerful, but it
mhm.
doesn't make me break out in tears.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and so let me push back a little bit, Stephen. I'd like to see what you'd say to this. So, we're kind of focusing on the emotional appeal of the afterlife apologetic, and what would you say to someone if they were like, well, he may not have had a reason to lie to you, but he had many reasons to believe the confirmation bias of his beliefs. Like, let's say we don't really know his position of belief when he had the experience, but let's just say for the sake of argument, he was a Christian. And so this experience validates his faith. And so he wants to share it with you because maybe he feels that it'll help validate your faith. And then it's kind of maybe it's a cathartic experience for both of you to feel validated in your beliefs. And so what would you kind of say to the idea, let's call it the confirmation bias theory of, people have reason to bring these events up and share these events on the grounds that they just simply want to confirm what they believe to be true.
Well, I think in so many of the experiences, it is not what the people wanted.
Hmm.
I was just reading a book. Jana Jana Harmon did her research on atheists who became Christian believers. She did a survey, and then she personally interviewed 50 atheists who had become Christians, and often they had to have some type of cataclysmic event. I say cataclysmic. It may have been a lot less than that. It may have been an event like they just started questioning materialism's ability to explain morals or something else. But often there was a like a vision that they had that they were not expecting. In fact, if they wanted something to be true, it was not Christianity. Most of these that she interviewed really just didn't respect Christians. If they were going to become religious at all, they didn't want Christianity to be true. And so they were not wanting this.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
so this was and one reason she wrote the book, she cut the subtitle is Unlikely Stories of Conversions. Why is it an unlikely story? Their whole paradigm, their
Mm-hmm.
whole worldview was anti God, anti
Yeah.
Christian, totally materialistic.
Yeah.
What would cause such an about face? Well, often there was a catalyst like a vision or something very strong like this in their life, and they didn't immediately typically become Christians, but that would start off their search because they would say, "My goodness, there's something else out there. I've
Y-
been wrong. I need to start studying." And then they would begin to study apologetics or ask people questions and get to know them better. So I think that in answer to your question,
Yeah.
circling back to that, it's this is not necessarily something that people are looking for and hoping for. And I don't know why he would be trying to convince me of something that I was already convinced of. And you know what? I actually met his wife in church and I said, "Okay, hey, not wanting to doubt your husband here, but I'm just one of these that wants to get all the evidence. What did he write something down for you in the hospital? What did he write down?" And so I got a secondary source saying, "Yeah, he wrote that down."
Yeah.
And
Corroborated.
that's
Okay.
exactly what happened. So he wasn't making something up or embellishing it.
Well, and I do want to note to kind of switch teams here, go from devil's advocate to kind of on your team really quick to say, even though someone may have a confirmation bias, that that still can be what they're saying can still be true, even if it does align up with their pre-built ideas, right? Like if I
True.
said, um, I have I believe math is true, right? And then I do mathematics and I do all these arguments to show you mathematics. And you go, well, you're a mathematician. Of course you want math to be true because your living's built around it. I would say, okay, yeah, that's true, but that doesn't make math false. It just means
Yeah.
I have a confirmation bias. So I want to point that out that even though some of the experiencers, and that was by the way, yeah, Steve, that was a great response. Even though some of the experiencers may be Christians and have a confirmation bias to be like, let me tell you about this journey I have to heaven. You're right. There are so many different experiencers who come from a vast background of different socioeconomic backgrounds to the point where you're right. There's atheists, there's Hindus, there's Buddhists, there's Muslims, and who if not Muslims would have a massive motivation for this to not be true, because for them to see Jesus and realize his lordship would be, I mean, that's a linchpin to the Islamic faith. That would take
Well,
out the
it's kind of
Islamic
like the
faith.
Apostle Paul. Uh, I think it's good evidence that he had a vision because his whole life was Judaism, his friendships, his
Mm,
job, his everything was related to that. He had every motivation in the world to not become a persecuted Christian and live the rest of his life in and out of jail.
mm-hmm.
Uh, and yet he did it. One person did a little research, and I think this is more of a preliminary study, but he felt like it was more people who are having a hard time with their faith or people completely out of the faith, like atheists and agnostics,
Mm-hmm.
who are more likely to have a near death or deathbed experience than the committed believer who already seems to be doing pretty good spiritually. So maybe this is a type of a sign that's especially given to people who need a boost in their faith, if not to come to
Mm,
faith from the very beginning. But this is a very powerful thing. One person did a study, one researcher of near death experiences was teaching this in a college class, secular college, and he did surveys and found out that these people were very much influenced in their values, what they thought was important, even though they had not had the experience, just by studying it.
Mm.
So that takes this argument a little bit further. Why afterlife apologetics? Well, even if you've never had such an experience or heard of one personally, just by studying it, people begin to realize it just kind of underscores so many things we know, like what's important? Love. Have I shown love to someone today? If I haven't, maybe I'm not really making an impact. Maybe I don't really understand that the most important command is to love God and love people if that's not in front of my life. So even studying it impacts people.
Mm. Well, and that's kind of goes back to the point of why the narrative is so strong to begin with. Why it has the emotional appeal to begin with, is that we have a deep knowledge that I think everyone comes kind of pre-programmed with, that we want to be loved, we want peace, we want security, we want what's quote real. Now, of course, those objections, or excuse me, those not those objections, those positions are objective. Those objectively true positions are, I think, innately known, and so therefore the narrative aspect of these experiences speaks to us on those levels, so that we don't necessarily understand the intellectual argument for it, but when we hear it, it moves us because it's what we want. We want something that was realer than real. We want to be loved by someone in an unconditional manner. We want to
And I
be.
would put it a little broader and say maybe it's we realize afterward, even if we weren't wanting it, that this was something we really needed.
Mm,
And then it happens, and you say, "Oh my goodness, I was going the wrong direction in life. I had no idea, but now I see I've been living for the wrong things."
well, it's
So I
like,
think it's what.
but
Go
don't you
ahead.
think that that's what materialism is attempting to fill the void of? I mean, that's why we seek to have the big house and the nice cars and the money and the this and then all the relationships, but it's very superficial relationships, right? Of like, what can you do for me?
Right,
Because it's
right.
like we believe that that is the way in which I get people to love me, as people will love me and I will have a peace about myself if I'm the envy of everyone. That's how they'll love me, because they'll be envious of me, and then that's just a misconception of love. And so it's like encounters with these experiences resonate with us deeply, because I've heard Frank Turk say this, that sin is trying to get good things bad ways, right? And
Hmm.
so to me, it's like that's exactly it. Is we're trying to figure out, how do I get good things in good ways, right? It's the means to the end is just as important as the end to God. Both of
Hmm.
both of those are equally important. It's like, I want you to seek the right things, but I also want you to seek the right things in the right way.
So why is it so emotional? Why does it make such an impact? I think what you're saying is one of the reasons is all of us want to be loved.
Mm-hmm.
And to be feel like you're loved by somebody really important like God.
Mm-hmm.
But let me give you one other case here. So same table. This is a guy sitting either right to my right or two people from my right on that same table. Okay, this is just showing just how common these experiences are. So this fellow's name is Ray, productive member of society, well respected within our church, but laid back person, reserved greeter in our church, drives a bus. He's a bus driver for the school system in his 70s. Now this happened to him about 20 years ago. He became a Christian kind of late in life in his 40s. He had resisted following God, resisted. Then in his 40s, he finally accepted Christ. Somebody told him, "Hey, you ought to read the Bible and pray." And so he's trying to have these like daily devotions. And he's reading about the crucifixion and how horrible it was. And he was starting to have some kind of doubts and questions. Did I do the right thing? Whatever. Going through a little time of doubt. And then out of the blue, he said, "I heard Jesus say," he said, "as clearly as we're talking today." This is Ray talking to me. And I was talking to him. He told me a little bit right before that meeting. Then I talked to him a couple of times afterwards. He said, "I heard Jesus say, as clearly as we're talking today, quote, Do you see what I did for you, Ray? Now, he was reading about Jesus on the cross, right? Do you see what I did for you, Ray? And that's when Ray chokes up. And I asked him about that later. I said, do you always choke up? He said, well, it used to be for years. I mean, this is like 30 years after the event, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, it used to be I couldn't even get through telling the story.
You just start
I was
bawling
just
right
so
away.
choked up. I just start bawling. But
Mm-hmm.
what it was, don't you know what I did for you, Ray? And he said, called me by name.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus knows me by name. Now, it would be kind of cool if Tom Brady knew me by name and was a buddy. I'd show him off at anywhere. I'd go to a bar with him. Hey, here's my buddy, you know. An important person knows me by name, but what if it was God? Jesus Christ, his son. No, and I mean, we hear these things in church,
Mm-hmm.
but this just kind of underscores it in some of these testimonies of people saying, and so it was just powerful for him, even though it was 32 years before. And he knows it happens. He knows it happened. In fact, and so he's not alone in this. Gallup interviewed 688 American adults asking if their prayers had ever been answered by a voice or a vision. 23% or more than one in five said yes. Now, I don't think Ray was actually praying for some kind of confirmation. He was kind of needing it. He was having some doubt. It just kind of came out of the blue. This is not a rare event.
Well, and I want to note that, maybe somebody goes, well, that wasn't a near death experience, right? Like that, he wasn't in any kind of life threatening situation there, or
That's true. That was now the first fellow that I shared about. His
he
was a
was.
near death
Yeah.
experience
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
with sepsis. This person was not. But I've broadened that a little bit in my latest book to say, okay, we're talking about near death and deathbed experiences,
But they really are
but
going to fall under
if you
this.
want, but there's under this
Mm-hmm.
same category of visionary experiences, there are all kinds of other confirmatory experiences, even when it's not at death.
Yeah.
And so people that say, oh, well, this is just because of the dying brain. Well, a lot of these experiences are not happening to dying people. And even some of the deathbed experiences are actually happening to perfectly healthy people who are seeing a loved one that's dying from a distance and know it. So it's
Yeah. You're referring
happening
to
to others as well.
crisis
So I think
apparitions.
that I think that the visionary experiences kind of feed into this. In fact, I should mention. So I may have mentioned that I do a survey every semester on my students. I have hundreds and hundreds of them now, but after I had about 80 or so of them, what I have them do is read my little book on that's talking about evidences for the Christian faith, and I have just like 17 lines of evidence, and I have them. Some are Christians, some are Muslims, some are atheists, some are agnostics. They're all over the board. But I just ask them to candidly rate each argument for God's existence as to what is the most compelling.
Hmm.
Scale of 0 to 10, what do you think is the most compelling? And the most compelling overall. Now, interestingly, there are tens scattered about of all these arguments, which shows that some people are impacted more by some arguments than others.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're interested in reaching others, don't always rely on the argument that convinced you. There may be something else that's more convincing to somebody else. But once you tally them up, by far the most impressive arguments to people are near-death experiences, deathbed experiences, and miracles. So that would be those would be sort of subcharacteristics of miracles, and yet it seems like a lot of apologists don't even touch those three so much. They mostly stay with the beginning of the universe, and that gets tens from a lot of my students. Okay, or the precise settings of the universe, that gets tens from some of my students. But it seems like the ones that are having the most impact on the most number of students so far in my survey are near death experiences, deathbed experiences, and other visionary or miraculous type experiences. And sometimes they'll say why that's important. Sometimes they'll say, well, this actually happened to me. I had this dramatic answer to prayer. I saw this dramatic miracle. For others, they just think it's a strong argument.
Yeah, okay. Man, I almost want to like go down that rabbit hole. How many have you had take that survey, Steve?
Now, I only tallied about 80 or so in my first year of doing that, but by now I've got probably 500 or more. In fact, if you'd like to tally those up and put it in your book, that would be a good study to put in there.
So you should definitely send that to me. I would
Okay,
100%
here we go.
I would 100% open up with that.
Y'all can ignore this audience. This is just me and Charlie giving ideas to each other.
No. I think it's relevant for the audience as well because it might interest them to hear the results of that survey. Like I would be curious to know if you could pull a ballpark estimate. Like was it 40%, 50% of students that said that? Um, or no? Do you think that would be too challenging right now and you just wouldn't want to commit to an answer?
So, chapter 13 of the book that'll be coming out at hopefully the end of this month on is Christianity compatible with near death and deathbed experiences. Uh, I'll actually give some statistics within that. I've got a chart, but I need to tally up the latter ones to have a bigger base to deal with. I
Mm-mm-mm.
think Kennesaw State is a good place because you have a big international population. You've got all kinds of students from different backgrounds, and so it makes for an interesting survey. And it's something we all need to know. How do people think? What convinces other
Yeah.
people
Well,
of
okay.
things like this?
Yeah, that's super fascinating. Let's talk about that more after the episode. But within this, I want to point the audience to you'd be like, oh well, now we're kind of expanding the category. You know, we start with near death experiences, move to deathbed visions, and now we're talking about miracles. I want to just make it clear that I feel very comfortable putting this all under the umbrella of Christian mysticism, and I know that that name has a really bad name to it, but in its strictest definition, Christian mysticism, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, Christian mysticism is just the belief of a personal experience of God, a personal encounter with God. That's really what Christian mysticism is that you believe in these experiences being possible and important when they happen. And so therefore, Saul's experience would be a biblical account of Christian mysticism. That would be an example.
It could be. I would differentiate a little bit in that I think Christian mystics are typically trying to have a mystical experience with God through prayer, through meditation, through all these things, where typically the experiences we're talking about were not sought out by somebody, they just came upon them passively.
Mm,
But the relationship with mysticism would be that they're believing that we can have some kind of direct contact with God. He's not some deistic God that just created us and then left, but he's intimately involved with our affairs. And mystics would believe that this mystical relationship is important for our spiritual growth and health.
would you agree with that statement or no?
Uh, it, I am not a feely, experiential type person on my own. So
Yeah.
I've had very little experiential things where I say, "Ooh, I just know that was God."
Hmm.
Or occasionally I'll have a dramatic answer to prayer, kind of dramatic, but it's just typically so. I think it's important for a lot of people to have some strong feelings within their Christian life. And some people, it seems to be just kind of like a daily thing. They just know God is there, like I look outside and see the world. For me, I'm going more on evidence simply because I've not had those kind of feely experiences so much. So I'm just going with the best evidence available for me.
But you would find it impactful if you did have that experience.
Oh, yes. I feel confident that if Ray or Paul, that I just told their stories, had I had their experiences, I'd be saying it was Jesus.
Hmm.
This was a God thing. I thought about it. I just don't see, because they seem as intelligent and as critical thinkers as I am. Why should I doubt that I'd have the same experience and draw the same
What was
conclusions?
the name of the guy in the first experience? Was it Ray? It was the first experience you told us about?
Ray was the second
Who was
experience.
the first one?
Paul was the first.
So Paul said in his experience that he knew it was Jesus. There was no questioning that.
Hmm.
So it's almost as if like he didn't need to, because the way you just framed it is like you would reflect on the experience and come to the conclusion, versus he didn't need to do that. He made it sound like he had supernatural knowledge in the experience that that was Jesus, and there was no convincing him otherwise.
These require a lot of thought because I asked him that very question. I said, okay,
Hmm.
so how did you know it was Jesus?
Hmm.
Did you see him dressed like Jesus
Yeah,
in a
yeah, yeah,
picture you'd seen? What did you do? And it was
yeah.
not that.
How,
He
hmm.
said, I've reflected over the
Oh,
years.
okay.
How did I know this was Jesus? And he said, I really can't tell you,
Hmm.
but I know it was Jesus. Now, to me, I relate this to so many of the near death and deathbed experiences. People are communicating mind to mind. So even when they see somebody that, uh, they'll just know it's an angel,
Mm-hmm.
or they'll just know that it was God, or they'll
Hmm.
just know that it was Jesus.
Hmm.
I think that's a similar thing that was going on with him. He said, I don't know how I knew, but I knew because it seems like on the other side, your mind is so enhanced that you're experiencing things directly rather than having to say, oh, I see it, or I smell it, or
Hmm.
I whatever. But other people do see an image of Jesus and recognize him as Jesus. So I don't want to say that's impossible. It was just not in his case that he had to make that deduction. He just knew.
Which I would say that that does tend to happen a lot when you read the experiences. Is that, I've come to refer to it personally as supernatural knowledge, in the sense that it's just given to them in the moment. And it honestly, Steve, makes me think of the passage, every knee shall bow, every tongue will confess that Christ is Lord. And it makes me think about the fact that, God will remove all possible alter interpretations of the experience, and you'll know who it is without, I don't know, having to
Yeah,
be told or something
I
like
don't
that.
get the impression somebody's going to be before the Lord after their death,
Who are
and
you?
they're going to be looking up there going, I don't get the impression they're saying, "Wow, this is the most interesting hallucination I've ever had."
Yeah.
No, they're just gonna know it all over.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Just like I know right now, I'm having a conversation with you, but
mm-hmm,
only many times more than that sense of knowing.
mm-hmm,
Some things we just know. I mean, I just know that I'm in the world, that I'm married to Sherry. Now could my mind be in a bottle
mm-hmm.
somewhere, being toyed with by
the
aliens? I
the
suppose so.
Matrix.
But there is a, but I feel like I just know that this reality is real. That's a part of my evidence for it, is the vividness with which I know that. And it seems
Mm-hmm.
to me when people go to the other side, they have a similar vividness, saying, I just know that that was an angel, or I just know that that was Jesus.
Oh,
And
it's
I
not.
think that was
It's
the
not just
experience in Paul's
similar.
case.
It's not just a similar vividness. They describe it as an increased level of vividness.
Right. Realer
And
than
then,
real.
yeah, that's the
This is
statement.
real, what we're having right now,
Yeah.
but that's realer than real.
Mm.
And if I ever experience like that, I'm going to be saying, okay, now I know from experience. But before, I just knew by reliable testimonies, and that's how we know most of our stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like I'm thinking back to the Grand Canyon example I used earlier, of if you had seen the Grand Canyon and someone tried to come to you and be like, that's not a real place, you don't know what you're talking about, that would be a really challenging thing if you're looking at it from especially if you're looking at it from a third party perspective of, why would this person have reason to lie about this place that they saw and described in vivid and great detail, that just so happens to match up in many ways with other people who've been there and described it, and you found patterns in the characteristics of those experiences, and although you've never been there, you're like, well, now it seems like the burden of proof is on the person who's calling this a lie, to prove that this person and all these other people are lying, when it seems like they don't know each other, yet their testimonies are lining up to a certain degree.
Right. If millions of people have been there, even if I didn't have photographs or videotape footage or documentaries, all of which can be toyed with, by the way, even if I didn't
Hmm.
have those, if I had millions of people who've testified to have seen it, I'd say, okay, well, I just ought to believe it. I mean, that just makes good sense
Yeah.
unless there's a bunch of counter evidence of people saying, "Oh, I walked across America and I never had to cross a big canyon."
Mm.
So you can go as complex as you want to, but good testimony, if it's not contradicted by good testimony, we tend to receive it. That's why a lot of scientists, I'd say most of what a scientist believes is not something he's experimented on himself.
Exactly.
He's read a report
Yeah.
of a reputable scientist who says they did it, and he believes their testimony. So
Yeah.
they're relying on testimonial evidence as well.
Well, and they have good reason to believe that scientist was telling the truth. And you could argue they're better off for it because now they don't have to waste time going back and starting every experiment from the beginning to personally verify the information. They can kind of, that's where the saying of stand on the shoulder of giants comes from, is that you basically
Right.
get to assume this information that came beforehand. You have good reason to assume they told you the truth. And then you can kind of start from, instead of step one, you get to start from step 55. And then, when you get to step 60, you get all the credit from steps 1 through 60. When the reality is you got to stand on the shoulder of giants, just kind of like I get to stand on Steve's shoulders. I wonder if I'm heavy or not. But, I get to stand on Steve's shoulders and then write my book and kind of make my arguments based off of your work and so on and so forth.
And
Um,
I've stood on the shoulders of all those that have actually done the research in the past. So,
right.
yeah, we're all doing the same thing here.
So we have a few more minutes, Steve, and so I want to kind of like wrap this up. I know we didn't get through all the topics we wanted to, so we'll continue next week, guys. With we've done some real life examples and testimonies, but I do want to talk a little bit more about the balance of emotion and evidence, and we definitely didn't even touch on the integration with other fields, which absolutely deserves an episode, because it is very important, especially for implications of, I think, the moral argument for God's existence and the historical resurrection of Jesus. I think those two are really important fields to discuss with the interplay that they have with afterlife apologetics. But let's wrap up this section. So we've been kind of jumping back and forth between the beautiful elements of the afterlife apologetic and then the intellectual elements of it. And so what I want to do is I want to kind of hit you with an objection really quick for the intellectual side. So it's like, look, all right, why do these people have reason to lie? I don't believe they have any reason to lie. I don't believe they have any reason to mislead me. I genuinely think they believe they had the experience they had. But here it comes. But there's been tons of people who said that they've seen aliens, they've been abducted by aliens, and so if in order for me to believe this, I could also say, based on the same line of reasoning, that aliens are true. And what do you say to that, sir?
Maybe they're true, maybe they're not. I've actually I'll just plead ignorance. I've not studied out the evidence. So
Hmm.
universe is pretty big. Maybe there are some aliens out there. I'm not sure. But I would say one thing, if you want that evidence to be comparable with the near death experience evidence, I would need for somebody to visit an alien and come back and say, hey, that alien showed me a new type of metal we could make that's more powerful than the strongest steel we have now. Here are the specifications. In other words, he comes back with something in his hand that can say, I got some technology or something from the other side that I can show that I was actually over there. Now, in the case of near death and deathbed experiences, what we find is studies of Sabom, for example, with his patients. It's not just that his patients are giving this testimony, but he's asking them, okay, while your heart was stopped, while you're experiencing clinical death, what you claim you're outside of the body. So, what did you see that I know you couldn't have seen on your own about your resuscitation? And they can bring back facts like that. That puts it in a different category than just a bunch of testimonies, right? And the same thing with crisis apparitions when people see people who just died. Um, they and they didn't know the person was sick. The person might have been on another continent. Okay, what's the explanation for the timing that you saw this? You've never had a vision before. You have a vision of that person saying goodbye after they died. And that's what Henry Sidgwick and his friends at Cambridge University and Oxford and with Harvard actually studied. So we've got other truths that are converging. Plus, there's so many that have had these experiences that you can find them in your own family. Okay, now, if somebody that I trust in my family says I actually saw an alien, uh, I may believe them. I haven't had anybody come to me with that so far,
Hmm.
but that's another layer of evidence when you don't just have to believe what people are saying on the outside, but you can confirm the studies of great intellectuals within your own circles of trust, people that you know and trust. And I think this is what we need to be doing with this evidence. And that's one reason for the great appeal of afterlife apologetics it's so widespread you can confirm it among the people that you know and trust.
And so, would you say that it then the corroborative evidence is what you're saying adds a level of validity to this apologetic that, like, for example, the argument for aliens existing wouldn't have access to?
I'd say that's one of the very much
One of them, okay.
differentiating factors. I mean, another factor would be that in a near death experience, people like Sabon, people like Van Lommel, they actually were reading doctors' records. They were actually talking to the people. They were ruling out hallucinogenic drugs. They were uh, they were confirming the sanity of these people. A lot of times when we're hearing those other experiences, we're just kind of hearing them. We don't know the people. Nobody's confirming their sanity. Nobody's asking the question, is there an ulterior motive, like they're writing a book or making a documentary? They're
Or
trying
an
to make some
alternate
money off this
explanation.
thing. Or
Yeah.
they've got a little stand set up with alien relics that they're selling in Arizona or something.
Mm.
There's a lot of confirmation that needs to be going on. Maybe it's going on in that area. I don't know. But I'm saying those are some things that I think set near death and deathbed experiences apart from those type testimonies.
And and so it's basically like the level of scrutiny that these experiences have been subjected to is much greater than this level of scrutiny that alien testimony have been subjected
Again,
to.
I've not read all that
Okay, okay,
evidence.
okay. But
I'm
you're
just
kind of
saying that
saying
it's
just
that
for
it's more than just a testimony. We've got corroboration from several different levels with these type testimonies.
yeah, and also Steve, do you feel, and this will be my last thing, is do you feel, I felt like there was kind of an implicit implication of this, but do you feel that it's like, okay, let's say I grant you that aliens are real, and then you grant me that God is real, right? What has greater impact on reality? You know, the fact that there's life somewhere else in the universe, or the fact that there's a transcendent reality by which all of this reality is contained inside of it. Is that safe to say that that's kind of part of the argument? Is that it's like, even if I were to grant you that these two were true, it's like C.S. Lewis says that if Christianity is um, false, then it's of no importance. But if it's true, it's of infinite importance.
Yes, and I think this comes back to the very topic we're talking about, which is afterlife apologetics. Why is it so important and what is its appeal? A lot of people are afraid of death. A lot of people wonder if there is an afterlife. Jesus said, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Wow, well, that scripture has, when I've gone through doubts and questions, it's haunted me. It's made me think, okay, I've got to keep up the search because nothing can be as important as the afterlife. That's going to help tell me what this life is all about. And what I don't want in life is to spend all my energies climbing up the ladder to success and get to the top and realize it was leaned against the wrong wall. I mean, these are you
Yeah,
talk
that's a
about
good point.
success books that are trying to tell you how to
Yeah,
how to
achieve
live your
happiness,
life, what's
basically.
yours,
Yeah.
first things first, all this. That's the most important first thing we've got to figure out. Why are we here? What's the afterlife? If this life is just 80 years and then there's an eternity out there, well, I'd better figure out the eternity.
Mm.
So, yes. Now, if I find out aliens exist, that's really interesting and I'd like to know more about it.
Hmm.
But I'm not going to spend my life studying them because I'd rather make sure what I believe about the afterlife, not only for myself, but for what I'm talking to others about. I'm influencing others. You're influencing others. I don't want to influence people the wrong direction. I want to know what this life's all about. And afterlife apologetics helps me to get there.
Mm. Good point to finish on. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. If you've made it to this point in the podcast, you're an absolute trooper. We love you guys in the sense that we want to give you truth and help you find the best way to live life. And we believe that that's represented in the Christian framework. But of course, that you should do your due diligence and find good arguments, good reasons to believe it. And that's part of why we do Afterlife Apologetics, is because we want you to have another reason of good evidence to believe in the truth of what Christ said to us. So we'll leave it there. We will see you guys back here next week for the next episode, episode 13. We are going to pick up where we left off We'll finish up with the balance of emotion and evidence, and then we're going to move into the integration with other fields, because I really do want to dedicate time to that, because I think it's really cool, for starters, because I'm a nerd, but also because it's very important, and it's helpful for these other arguments, and it answers super relevant questions like, why, if God is so loving, does he allow evil? That's a really big question, I think, that has haunted humanity for a long time, and I do feel like Afterlife Apologetics sheds a ton of light on that topic. So definitely want to come back for that next week. We will see you guys here next Tuesday. We're gonna try to stick to this time moving forward. This seems to be a good one for both Miller and I, so we're gonna try to stick to this one moving forward. So you guys here next Tuesday for the next live. In the meantime, God bless. We'll see you guys on the other side.